How are you? My name is Stephen Grady, and I'm Chief of Staff for your Detroit City Council President. And we've called this press conference today on human trafficking to bring some awareness to this particular issue. Joining us today will be Council President Brenda Jones, Detroit Chief of Police James Craig and his team, and we also have a person who is going to have a personal story about human trafficking. So I'd like to introduce to you Detroit City Council President Brenda Jones.
Good morning to everyone. And bear with me because I don't know what I have, but we're going to get through this this morning. Thank you to the media and to our law enforcement partners and community for attending this press conference, and joining me is my colleague, Councilmember Scott Benson, who is the chair of Public Health and Safety for the Detroit City Council. January is Human Trafficking Month, and to bring awareness to this important issue, we wanted to call this press conference to get the media's help to get the word out. Last year, I became aware of the issue when I met a survivor of human trafficking. Since then, I've sponsored 2 very well attended town hall meetings on human trafficking. In partnership with local, state, and federal law enforcement officials, school leadership, the faith-based and business communities, and neighborhood organizations, we're coming together to organize and align our activities around fighting against human trafficking. To that end, I am announcing the formation of the Detroit Commission on Human Trafficking. In case you did not know, Michigan is number two in human trafficking. Number 2. That is ridiculous. In Detroit, for special events like the auto show, human trafficking is very active, as our experts will describe it. Sometimes it happens in hotels or motels, or even in the neighborhoods at the house right next door to you, right up under your nose, but you don't know what you're looking at. Today, we will describe some of the scenarios and things to look for and what you can do if you suspect someone is being trafficked. We appreciate the media helping to get this message out. The biggest ideal we want is to share is that if you see something, you say something. There's a national hotline number and text message address that can be used for more information to report a situation. By speaking up, you might save someone's life. So let's tell everyone, if you see something, speak up. I'd like to introduce Chief Craig, and he's going to give you even more information.
Thank you.
Chief.
Thank you. Well, the council president said it best. First, let me just start out and applaud the leadership of our elected leaders in this issue. As council president pointed out, number 2, only exceeded by Nevada. Michigan is number 2 in the country. I will tell you, when I first learned this, I was surprised. I would have thought it would have been California first. I would have thought maybe following California, maybe Nevada. And I know in my time in other cities up along the corridor of the Northeast, Maine and Cincinnati, all through there, certainly well known for sex trafficking. But as number 2, let me just say this, that I want to applaud the work of the Detroit Police Department And for the 4 years that I've been here, we have placed a focus on making a great effort in eradicating sex trafficking in this city. We also know that much of the complaints of sex trafficking are emanating from our strip clubs. We also know that it comes out of some of the local motels, not just in the city, but more or less in the region. So that has been one of our focus. It will continue to be the focus, but let me share some good news. Some good news is in November of last year, the department was awarded a $1.8 million grant for human trafficking. $1.8 million grant. That grant will go before City Council next week, requesting a $600,000 match. What that translates into is 15 additional officers to focus on one thing and one thing only: human and sex trafficking. And when you break it out, we know that sex trafficking tends to be the dominant of the illegal activity. So we're excited about moving forward with this grant, and certainly the support of the Detroit City Council. And so with that, I'll close on that note that we are looking forward to really putting a dent in this problem, particularly as being ranked number 2 in the country. So thank you.
Next, I'm going to call my colleague up, Councilmember Scott Benson.
All right, thank you. Just want to say I'm looking forward to continuing to support the leadership of Council President Brenda Jones and Chief Craig on this very important issue. It's key and critical that we support and protect some of our most vulnerable citizens in the city, marginalized citizens as well as small children. And my office has been at the tip of the spear when it's come to helping to enforce regulations against illegal and rogue strip clubs within our communities and within our city. So I just want to once again applaud the efforts and continue to stand in support of this great initiative.
And now for a very personal story. I am going to call Ms. Harriet Carmack up, and she's going to give you a very personal story.
Good morning. Hey, everybody. My story is not much different from most people. And I wanted to say thank you, first of all, to the leadership for organizing this conference, especially in light of the background of the auto show being here in Detroit. Sex trafficking and human trafficking should be a public concern. The reason for that is that there's so many young girls who have been taken. All of us have seen the movie Taken, but what we saw is just a small symbol of what really happens. I run a shelter for human trafficking survivors, and I have folks in my shelter who were taken at 7 years old, transported across the country in a multitude of states, and who can verify and who have had experiences in having sex in various parts of the city. We've got to put an end to this. It has to stop. As a community, we need your help. As Council President has said, and it has been echoed by law enforcement, if you see something, say something. Speak up. We're not going to ask you to interfere or intercept, but what we're going to ask is that you call 911 if you see something that just doesn't fit right. It doesn't hit right. Now, I can tell you what doesn't hit right because I was one of them. When I first came to this country, I came here like everybody else, and my ex-husband ensured that I didn't have the documents that were required to be here. There were many days when I was transported and I was driven on the highways. I lived in Central Florida. I wished that someone could have looked in my face and seen the terror that I faced. And if somebody had seen something and said something, the outcome would have been different. Luckily for me, I survived. Luckily, I am here today. And I stand here for those survivors who are unable to speak up, those survivors who are unable to face the cameras. I have girls in my shelter who couldn't be here. They don't want to be seen on camera because there are people still searching for them, people who have threatened them. To you and I, that's abnormal. It's very hard to imagine what it feels like when someone has held a gun to your head and who has forced you into sex that you don't want to have. Sex trafficking and human trafficking is about being forced to do things that you don't want to do. Too many of our young people are caught up in this. Right now, there are girls, right as we speak, there are girls right this minute who are having sex. I just left my shelter with 2 young women who are terrified to be interviewed by law enforcement. Young women whose identities have been stolen. We went last week to Social Security and found out that someone had taken her ID and has bought cars and has taken out student loans in her name. I am a living witness. I am asking you as members of the public, you are my community, when you see girls on the street, don't just imagine that they're sex workers and they're there because they're having a good day. They're there invariably because they're coerced and they're forced to have sex against their will. Then there's also labor trafficking, people who are forced to work without documentation, who work 16 to 18 hours per day. I am asking you to please, if you see something, say something. Speak up and ask your help. Don't interfere because these folks have a business to produce. The sex trafficking industry is a $32 billion a year industry. It means somebody is funding this. So we need your help. See something, say something. Thank you so much.
I just want to come back up, and certainly you relayed something that I'm deeply concerned about. One, the fact that you're now aware of some young women that are actively engaging in sex trafficking but are afraid to talk to the police. As you said, see something, say something, and I know you said it here. So I have members of our task force that are here. I would like, at the conclusion of this, if we could have a conversation so that we can begin the work of finding a way to develop a rapport with these young women so that we can stop that. Because to talk about it and we're not really doing anything because they don't want to talk to the police is really not the response we're looking for. We do have a task force that is solely set up to identify sex trafficking as well as human trafficking. And the work that they're doing is great work, but as soon as we launch the grant and the 15 new officers, we will take it to the next level. So again, if at the conclusion, and I think it's Captain Jackson, maybe we could introduce so that we can kind of work on that one case she just talked about.
Yes, sir.
And as it was talked about by Council President, certainly it's no secret that during the auto show, there's much more activity. There's people, sex traffickers, that come from all across this country. You may remember last year, Joint Task Force, there were 22 arrests made. We are actively working cases now. So we hope to have some good news for you in the coming days. But we are actively working, we are investigating. And so with that, I turn it back over to the Council President.
Thank you. And I just want to say that human trafficking is very serious. We say we're number 2 to Nevada. Guess what? Prostitution is legal in Nevada. And so we're really number 1 if you really want to think about it. And it's such a sad thing when it was brought to my attention. I want to thank again Chief Craig and his team, the FBI, the state police, the task force that has been put together to fight human trafficking. My team and I have had additional training. We will continue to have training. There is a lot of money at the federal level, a lot of grant dollars that are out there. We have a lot of people that are working on human trafficking in different areas. What we are attempting to do with the commission is to bring people together so that we all know what each other is doing. We're looking to train DTE. They are out there. They see a lot of things as they are working. We're looking to train SBC, the phone guys who are out there, who are working. We are looking to go into the schools to talk to the children, to let them know what to look for when someone approaches them. So there's just so much work to be done in this area. Everyone should have the press, the media advisory. The numbers are on the media advisory that you can call. The human trafficking hotline number is 888-373-7888, or you can text INFO or help to BEFREE, which is Be Free, 233733. In an obvious emergency situation, if anyone is witnessing any criminal activity, we ask them to please call 911. The other thing we're looking to do is make sure people at phone stores such as Metro PCS are trained. Some of the things that happens is the traffickers are going to Metro PCS. They're getting 10, 12 telephones. And Metro PCS, if they're not trained, they're not knowing what to look for. We're looking to train people in the emergency room. Some of these females are taken to ER. They've been beaten. The trafficker is on the side. If the nurse or the ER attendant doesn't know what to look for, they don't know that it's human trafficking. And so we're looking to get people trained in all areas so that Michigan is not number 2. So again, I ask you all to work with us to help get the word out. We want to help keep our city safe, help keep our females safe, and stop this criminal activity. Again, thank you all for being here.
I'll take any questions.
Chief, while prostitution may be legal in Nevada and not obviously here, I think it's important to distinguish the difference between prostitution and human trafficking. Because I think a lot of people may think, oh, it's just prostitution.
Right.
But we're not talking about prostitution. Although illegal, we're not talking about that.
Very different. And I guess it's simply said forced. What's going on is when someone's forced into sex trafficking, forced to, say, perform labor at minuscule pay, if any. So the issue is force. When you talk about prostitution, and as you pointed out, it is legal in the state of Nevada, but what is not legal is forcing someone into sex trafficking. And so there is a big market in that state for that illegal activity.
What would you say to people that are coming to Detroit this week, and this weekend, who may be looking to engage in?
Just don't do it. We will be watching. As I indicated, we are actively working a number of investigations now. As I pointed out last year, there were 22 arrests. And for those, as it was already pointed out, if you see something, absolutely say something. Help law enforcement. Look for some of the signs. Sometimes you see a young person, male or female, that appears to be under the control of someone who is in a dazed state. Could mean they're under the influence of a narcotic, but also forced into this illicit trade of sex trafficking. And so if something just doesn't feel right and look right, give us an opportunity to look into it so we can take appropriate action.
Chief, the 22 cases last year, they were all tied to the auto show, and the ones that you're currently investigating also?
22 last year were tied. Some are tied and not tied. Again, there's an increased influx of people visiting the Detroit area, and so a lot of sex traffickers know whether it's in this case, it's our auto show. Super Bowl is usually another place. Any major sporting event where lots of people are going to converge on the city, for many of the sex traffickers, that's an opportunity. And many times they advertise this illicit trade through social media and through different publications.
Chief,
Chief, are you expecting more cases to happen because of the auto show in the next couple of weeks?
Well, as I indicated, this is a main event for the city. Lots of people come, and so I, I can just about anticipate, and our investigators are staffed up to address that issue. So we anticipate it, yes. You had a question, sir?
Those cell phones being utilized, they're going to the store buying some 10, 12 cell phones. How are they being utilized?
Well, I don't want to go into a lot of details of what they do, that what we know. Just like I don't want to get, we're very adept at using social media, but that's a means of communication.
Chief, can you talk a little bit about the timeline of when you're going to hire those 15 additional officers with the $1.8 million grant that you had mentioned?
So the plan is right now, and it's still in its infant stages, our first next step is getting through city council. Once that takes place, then we will look at the additional hiring. Now, the new officers won't be put into the task force. By the way, what I didn't mention, this $1.8 million grant is over a 3-year period. So we'll have this up running for 3 years. And as I'm thinking about what our task force will look like, I'm going to reach out and ask for some additional personnel support from the state, maybe the county, because we work well in collaborative relationships with our other law enforcement partners.
Where did the grant come from?
The Department of Justice.
Council President Jones, could you just talk about your efforts and why you started, the position you started, and what their task will be?
Okay, let me just say that my efforts began when someone brought it to my attention about how bad human trafficking was basically in Southwest Detroit. And when it was brought to my attention on how bad it was in Southwest Detroit, I began studying and doing investigation and called Chief Craig. And Chief Craig immediately, he did not waste a minute getting involved. I also would like to just give a shout out to Todd Bettison because Todd Bettison and Chief Craig assigned him to work with us, and he's worked with us and has been through training with us as well. And so it's very serious. I compared it with prostitution, and the reason why I compared it with prostitution is because all so often you see the girls or the guys out, and you think they're just prostitutes out there, and they're not. They're actually being trafficked. And people don't realize that they're not out there because they're just prostitutes. They're out there because someone is trafficking them, and someone is close by watching what they're doing.
In the 22 cases, how far have you seen someone travel to Detroit?
I can tell you they come from all over the country. Again, they move around the United States. Again, Super Bowl, I know that a number of these traffickers will go, I think it's in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So it's probably going to be an influx there as well. So, but we have this auto show every year. And so a lot of times these sex traffickers are travelers that will move around. I talked a little bit about my experience with the sex traffickers in Cincinnati and how they use the I-75 corridor. And the reason why they move and travel is so that it's less likelihood that they will be detected. And so part of this work that we're embarking on is having a relationship with the managers of these various hotels that when they see something like a young person, male or female, and something doesn't feel right, they should notify us so that we can start an investigation.
Do they tend to target cities that have big events?
Typically, but also aside from just that, again, I talk about the traveler cases where they just move around.
Let me also talk about the international border that we have right there. We have an international border which also is one of the concerns when you talk about trafficking as well. And we have a victim that's working with us as well who was taken out of the state to another state. And sometimes you look at when they're being taken to another state and when they're here, what is actually going on. And one of the things that we have to look at is changing the laws and making the laws even stiffer in Michigan, because what happens in other states is the time runs doesn't run consecutive, and in Michigan, the time runs. You're serving, if you have a federal as well as a state, you're serving that time together. And in other states, you don't. You have to serve your federal time, and then you have to serve your state time. And so we have to look at the laws as well and get some changes to the laws to help us.
I just wanted to add one more point so that we're crystal clear. Prostitution in the state of Michigan is not legal.
Right.
Prostitution and someone who's involved in sex trafficking, before we put human trafficking back years ago, was pimping, pandering, which is simply the same. Prostitution is illegal, and someone who engaging in prostitution, while they're doing it voluntary, the key is forced. That's the difference, the distinct difference in the sex trafficking.
In the cases here in Detroit, are most of the victims young women or children, or what sort of the group is it?
It's a variety. Sometimes, the other thing, we encourage parents to be very aware of the activity their children are involved in social media, because many times these sex traffickers prey on children. We do investigate traveler cases too, where those individuals that will travel engage in a long-term social media relationship with a child, and then will travel, say, to Detroit to meet up with the child. Many times we have undercover operations to intercept those type of individuals as well. And a lot of times it's when a child is having problems at home and someone has made an offer of something better. There's a kidnapping, an abduction, and they end up being taken by these sex traffickers, which is another common effort.
Chief Craig, your statistics saying number 2, what source are those from?
This is sources I've heard actually in the media. I don't know if it's coming out of the Department of Justice. That's why when I heard it just recently that we were ranked number 2 in the country, I do want to do a deeper dive into that. But, maybe that was one of the reasons why when we applied for this grant, because we are ranked so high, the Department of Justice did grant, and that's a pretty substantial grant. You're talking about $1.8 million over a 3-year period, which again translates into hiring 15 officers. But I want to take it a little bit beyond that, because I want to see if I can elicit some of our other law enforcement partners to participate.
Right, because I was at a press conference where Michigan State Police last week said that we were number 8, which obviously is still very high.
It's still high. Yeah, I heard that 8 also, but I'm recently hearing number 2, and to be candid, I don't know what they're basing it on. Of course, we have this one big event, which shouldn't define, that would thrust us into the number 2 spot. Again, every major city in the country has major sporting events. And so again, these sex traffickers, they travel. They go to places like Super Bowl, World Series. It's not just an auto show. New York has an auto show.
Chief, do we classify in any stats these crimes? I know that a few weeks ago we talked about the stats for 2017, but like number 22, how is it calculated here in Detroit? Does it fall under prostitution here in the city of Detroit? Does it fall under assaults, kidnappings? What does it fall under?
Well, it depends. It wouldn't be, a sex trafficker is not, it doesn't fall under the crime of prostitution. Again, it's a very different situation. If there's an abduction and someone kidnaps and then forces someone into some form of labor, in this case sex trafficking, that's a separate crime, a felony. Prostitution in itself is a misdemeanor. So, but we can certainly, at the appropriate time, I don't have the number of arrests that we made totaling 2017. I can tell you about, the 22 that were associated with the auto show last year.
Quick question. Can you spell your name for us?
Harriet, Harriet. My last name is Cammock.
And your shelter's in Detroit?
Yes.
How long have you been in operation with the shelter? How many people come to your shelter on a monthly basis or yearly basis?
We started in October, but myself and my partner Elaine Flowers, who's here, we were part of Senator Judy Emmons's task force on ending human trafficking in Michigan. And our particular focus was, as Chief Craig says, is getting at the people who are soliciting, the people who are interested in having sex with people who don't want to have sex with them, children, for instance. And so there began our concern. My concern was, what happens to adult women who have been trafficked, who were formerly trafficked as children? And what we found was that invariably they're homeless. So they're a highly transient population who go from state to state, from shelter to shelter, because in most states, shelters are, you can only stay in a shelter for 45 days. So these ladies have formed themselves into survivor groups. So we find them online, they reach out to us, and we help them to get to Michigan and provide them with safety.
How many victims are you sheltering now in your place?
I currently have 2. I have a waiting list, but I can only sleep 7. So, and these are adult women. And I want to make the distinction here, as Chief Craig has said, prostitution is not the same thing as sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is where people are forced into having sex. Now, you can see a grown woman standing on the street, and you think, oh, well, she chooses to be there. Not necessarily. What we're finding is that people have been conditioned, and they have developed records for solicitation and lewdness, and what's the other one, lewd acts, that predispose them to not being able to hold down a steady job. So in 2014, 2015, the governor passed a law that made it so that if you've had a record, you could still work. But here's the thing, we're people, right? So you apply for a job and you go to human resources. They Google your name, shows up, you have something attached to your name, you don't get a job. So these girls have been so severely traumatized that they're unable to hold a steady job. They're unable to even have a 15-minute conversation. Even just a visit to the therapist involves conditioning because they're so accustomed to someone beating them, someone holding them hostage, that it's virtually impossible. Our council president came to visit us this past Monday. She brought toiletries for our girls because when the girls come to us, they're homeless. They have nothing. They don't have toothpaste. They don't have toothbrushes. And so council president, knowing of our situation, brought supplies. Well, she met one of our girls. Before I could introduce her, I had to tell her who she is and why she's a public official, so she wasn't afraid that she was going to hurt her. Is she going to take me away? Is she someone I can trust? And so we've had to take our girls to therapy. I don't have government funding. So we did this, when we started, we did this out of our pockets because the plight of women who are adults and who, for whatever reason, can't be like you and I, can't hold a job, can't speak steadily, they would never come here. They would never be seen in public. Taking them to Walmart is a big deal. And so we've had to look at human trafficking and look at sex trafficking for what it is. It is a crime against humanity. It's a crime especially against women. Sex trafficking, make no doubt about it, is violence against women and girls. So we got to do something about it.
Thank you.
You have a question?
Yes, I do. With sex trafficking, like Harriet said, when we identify these people, and you mentioned that you wish somebody would look in your face and could have helped you. For the citizen that has been trained in human trafficking, is there some sort of resource that if we decide to do a citizen's arrest, that we can actually take that person into custody? Do we need to reach out to the sheriff, or is there somebody on the new task force where we can enact an arrest at that moment?
Before we talk about making citizens arrests, you have to, one, know if there's been a crime committed. The idea that in your mind, our police officers are trained to understand the difference between probable cause to arrest, a reasonable suspicion to detain. All we need is something that doesn't feel right. Let our officers come in, make the call, they'll do the investigation, and make a determination whether or not there is probable cause to arrest someone or take someone into protective custody. We don't want people doing that, and certainly putting our citizens in harm's way. That's the job of the police.
Should people call 911 if they see something?
They can call 911. Certainly, several numbers that Council President gave out are good. Certainly, my team, is anything you want to add in terms of contact numbers?
596-1960.
596
That's right.
1950 313 area code, and that's our sex crimes unit. Okay, thank you very much.
Again, thank you all. And before we leave, I do have to say that there has been businesses and Strategic Staffing Solutions did do training there, as well as Dr. Vitti from the school systems that is working with us as well. So thank you all for being here.